Hello and welcome. Good to have everybody joining us today. We're very excited that you could do so. I'm Brett Theodos. I lead our practice at the Urban Institute, focusing on mission finance and community economic development topics. I'm thrilled to bring forward this discussion today. We have some new evidence to bring to bear on a really important and emerging space, rent reporting. We've really seen it take off and get momentum both in the policy space and the philanthropy space and the practice space. And yet there's a lot that we still need to know about rent reporting. By way of background and motivation, we know renters are 7 or more times more likely than homeowners to be missing credit scores. So we do have differences that exist with respect to who has access to credit scores. And we know there's benefits of having higher scores, saving 5 points of APR on a car loan if you can get above 600 on a credit score, saving on credit cards in terms of interest rates, being able to qualify for loans. And there's other well-being benefits that matter with respect to credit. But there's also real questions, especially for something in the rent reporting space. Who benefits? How much do people benefit? And is the benefit worth the cost? And so we're going to be digging into that today with some new research. Want to thank those who have been engaged along the way. A special thanks to National Endowment for Financial Education and their support of this research. We'll be hearing from them in a little bit. Our study partner along the way was Credit Builders Alliance, that did the outreach and engagement with the affordable housing providers that participated in the study. A special thanks to the providers and residents. Thanks to Isuzu, who facilitated some of this reporting. TransUnion, we'll get to hear from as well, that provided research. So this is, I hope, informative to many, and we will be providing some presentations as well as panel discussions along the way. And we promise to also do a little bit of level setting on what reporting is, what the landscape looks like, and how it works mechanically. But first, want to pass it to Joshua, if you don't mind joining us and sharing a few words. Thanks.
Thank you, Brett. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Caraballo. I'm the Managing Director of Research at the National Endowment for Financial Education, or NEFI. Thank you to Brett and his team, as well as all the other folks at Urban Institute for hosting this important and timely webinar, and to all the esteemed speakers who are participating today. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with NEFI, we are the independent centralizing foundation, a private foundation that is providing leadership, research, and collaboration to advance financial well-being for over 30 years, all through the conduit of championing effective financial education. I must say that it was a great honor to collaborate with the Urban Institute, a research organization, as we all know, with over 50 years of service and a mission that places a high value on evidence and solutions to improve people's lives and strengthen our communities. It was also a great honor to work with this expert research team. So Brett, Daniel, Sam, who not only rose to the top of a highly competitive process for research funding here at NEFI, but also showed much resilience in the face of a few challenges, including a global pandemic when the project was first initiated. Through it all, they showed much grace, professionalism, and most importantly, kept the integrity of this project intact. So what you see presented here today is a culmination of a lot of hard work and fortitude. And I know I speak for everyone here at NEFI when I say that we are deeply proud and grateful for your contributions to the literature and the value that this work will bring to the field. Speaking of that value, I know Brett alluded to some of this. We know that credit limited and credit invisible folks are unable to access many types of financial products. They're also charged higher interest rates and may even have fewer options when searching for or even trying to attempt to access crucial components of their financial well-being. And of course, this includes housing. This obviously limits their inclusion and creates additional monetary burdens that can easily add up to thousands of dollars annually, making it harder for them to maintain and improve their financial lives. And over the last decade or so, we've seen an uptick in the adoption and implementation of rent reporting programs to support broader access to credit, creating a concerted need, obviously, to understand how historically disadvantaged renters, such as those living in affordable housing units, may benefit from such programs. And as you'll see today, this project's findings gives us a great foundation to work off of, and it is our hope that additional lines of rigorous inquiry will help us to continue this conversation and build momentum to explore what, who can benefit, and who benefits the most from rent reporting and increased access to valuable resources like credit. So thank you again, and congratulations to everyone on this achievement. I now have the pleasure of handing things off to Maitri Johnson, who is the Senior Vice President of Tenant and Employment at TransUnion.
Thank you, Joshua. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the Urban Institute and all my esteemed colleagues on this call today for being a part of this very important topic and this study. I am the Senior Vice President of the Tenant and Employment Business at TransUnion, and rent payment reporting flows through my business at the company. I joined TransUnion back in 2013, but prior to that, I was on the property management side, working with the second largest property management operator in the US, and then moved into single family rental homes. In the event you're wondering why I'm providing such detail on my background, it's relevant. It's relevant to why I'm as passionate as I am about this topic. Because when I started in single family rental homes, our renters were coming out of the mortgage crisis and moving into rental homes as the mortgage crisis impacted them. And so one of the observations I made very early was, how can we help these individuals get back into home ownership and rebuild their credit? And to me, the most obvious way to do this was to report the payments they were making to us in the form of rent for those single family rental homes to help them rebuild that credit. And at that time, this was many years ago, there were very limited options on how we could get those monthly rent payments onto the credit reports, which really gave rise to my passion about this topic. And many have heard me say, why would a $25 credit card payment matter on someone's credit report, but not a $2,500 monthly rent payment? So fast forward, when I joined TransUnion, we had the opportunity to bring this to life and bring this to fruition. And that's exactly what we did. We started the process of gathering rent payment data together shortly after I joined the company. But it's not just me who's passionate about this topic, it's also TransUnion. One of our core enterprise strategies is to increase financial inclusion and business opportunity. And what better way for us to do this than to really make a difference by taking that rent payment and putting it on a consumer's credit report. We have this as one of our core business strategies because we want to provide equitable access to the financial ecosystem with fair and accurately priced financial products. We've already heard Joshua reference this, and we've also heard Brett reference this in his introduction. We take pride in promoting opportunities to help consumers improve their financial health, become more resilient, and achieve their dreams. It's hard to do that if you can't build credit. And there are studies out there, unfortunately, that find that over 20 million consumers are credit invisible. And so what if we could help them become visible? Millions more have what's called thin files, which means limited history. So one key lever to help those individuals build that credit is through rent payment reporting. Investing in consumers' financial health through rental data creates greater economic prosperity for renters. A study we did back in 2023 found that 80% of renters who had their rent payments reported increase their their credit scores. So this is a very important topic, and one of the growth factors that we have seen is in the trade lines that are being reported. We treat this as a trade line on a consumer's credit report, and this becomes a particularly important element of the credit report as renters continue to face higher rates of financial hardship. And this continues to challenge renters and consumers today, even more so today. Again, in a 2023 US Trends report, the Financial Health Network reported 3 out of 10 renters were financially vulnerable in 2023 compared with 9% of homeowners. In the same study, only 13% of renters considered themselves financially healthy. So look, we have a case here on why rent payment reporting is important. Since we started gathering rent payment data onto the consumer's credit report, we have also been analyzing how this impacts credit scores for that population. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll see evidence of this. We do an analysis every 6 months. This dates back to December, the end of December of 2024. And what's very evident here when we have done this credit report impact analysis is the effect it has on the unscorable, that's that thin file population I referred to, as well as the subprime population. These individuals, these consumers, these renters have the ability to not only improve their credit scores, but become credit visible over a 6-month or more period of having their rent payments reported. 11.5% of the total rental trade population we have fall in the unscorable bucket. They were able to move to become credit visible with an average score change of 661, which is what you see here on this screen. So it's material, it's impactful, and it does make a difference to the population who needs the most help and support, and really bring that financial inclusion element to life. You will also see in the subprime population, the score, while not as dramatically different as unscorable, it does make a difference and did improve scores by 13 points on average. What we also find here as we go into the higher credit score buckets of high prime and super prime, there's very little effect. So really where the consumer needs the most help is in that unscorable and subprime populations, and you see that evidence here. So I'm going to close by saying rent payment reporting clearly does make a difference. While today the vast majority of the rental payment trade lines that are reported into us and other organizations are largely focused on positive only, there is a case to be made also for full file reporting. But regardless, rental payment trade lines do matter, do make a difference, particularly in the consumer population that needs the most support. With that, I'd like to thank Urban Institute and all of my colleagues again on this call for giving us the opportunity to be a part of this very important project. With that, I will turn it back over to Brett. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maitri. And all right, here we go, everyone. We are excited to dig into the study results. I'll walk you through, and then we'll have a discussion. Okay. So first, the study's live on our website. We'll put a link to it in the chat, but you can dig in more thoroughly. There has been some good outcome data tracking. There's also been some good literature that has done scenario modeling. Here was a pre-post test that Credit Builders Alliance did in their 2015 pilot, finding a share of folks that had increased credit scores, no change, or decrease, and looking at how that differed. Fairly confirmatory with what Maitri was just saying about the biggest benefits happening in the subprime space. Build Rewards and others had have done work there as well. And so there's this emerging theme that we will pick up as well in our research. And there have been a number of other studies, including by colleagues here at Urban and our housing finance group, that have done some scenario modeling to look at effects and finding some pretty consistent results at this point. Okay, so we did a field study. So we've done the first impact assessment of rent reporting in a randomized control trial way where we're really assessing results kind of as they occur in the real world. And we'll talk about some of the challenges, opportunities, and real world ways that this happens. But just quickly on the study, so what we tested was the impact of opt-in and positive-only rent reporting. We did it in an affordable housing context. I'll share a little bit more about that in a minute. We're looking at effects on tenants' credit scores. Do we see evidence of having a score where one was not previously seen? How much are scores changing? Are people moving across these big categories or tiers that matter in terms of pricing or availability of credit? We also then look at what we would call some more secondary outcomes. Do we see people able to access credit as a result of some of those primary impacts? Do we see changes in debt levels or utilization, things like loan performance, these sort of follow-on effects? Okay, so our study went over a couple of years. COVID slowed us down. We had a hard time doing enrollment when everything was locked down. So we waited a bit, but we were able to do a study with 6 different providers. We did so in 2 different ways. We had what we called a randomized wait list design. So people opted in to say they were interested in rent reporting, and some people were able to get it right away. And so that was our assigned treatment group. And then other people got it after the 5-month study period went through. And so that means nobody was denied access to rent reporting that was interested in it. They just had to wait a little bit to get there. And the reason that we think 5 months is enough for us to pick up an effect is that on day 1, when that rent reporting goes into place, we can have the back reporting of rent, again, positive only and opt-in, but up to 24 months that can come into the file. So there can be a pretty right-away effect on the credit profile of people. So that's the control group and the treatment group. And then what we're measuring is the difference between the treatment and control group for the period where the treatment is getting their rent reported and the control group is not yet getting their rent reported. Okay, these are everybody that's been involved. You've heard some of the partners along the way, but as you know how rent reporting works, it starts, of course, with the tenant paying their rent to the property manager, to the owner, development entity that's owning and managing that work. And then they're passing it through often to some other firm. There are several that are out there. Isuzu is the one that we've worked through in this case. And then those firms are packaging the rental data and reporting it onto the credit reporting firms such as TransUnion. So that's the process mechanically, and that's what we observed here and worked with in this study. Okay, so as I mentioned, our context was residents in affordable or in assisted housing, which is a very specific population, but I think an important one for this context would be because we think those are people who might stand to benefit. And we know that public housing authorities and other entities in the affordable housing space are interested in rent reporting. These providers were mission-based nonprofits, so this was not public housing, but more nonprofit operated affordable housing. We did not report missed payments. The providers did not. And Isuzu was the intermediary. There was some defrayed costs through the grants for the housing providers. So in this study, renters did not pay for rent reporting. It was opt-in, and I gave you the timeline. Great. Okay, so how did it go? here's where we'll start. These are the different states that we were in. As you can see, our study sample is not huge, but had enough precision and enough size that we can pick up some effects, though not enough for us to do a lot of subgroup analysis. Okay. So when we started our treatment group and the control group, how many have had rent reported and have an open rent trade line? Basically, no one, very few, 1, 2 people. So that's what we think. People are entering into our study without having had their rent reported. And then how does it look after our study, right? An important reminder, life happens, and there are reasons that people do or don't engage in rent reporting, even if they're interested. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But where we got to is that roughly 7 of 10 folks in the treatment group actually had their rent reported. And then a couple more did on the control side, though very few. So this is a good sign for a randomized trial, like there actually was an intervention. People did have their rent reported, and mostly that happened for the treatment group and not the control group. So that's what gives us confidence in testing what we're testing. Okay, what were the impacts? All right, so they're interesting, and we'll get to some of the granularity here. But the first one is the extent to which people have a Vantage score, or we could have looked at FICO as well. And so what we're interested in is the change before and after for the treatment group relative to this control group. So this kind of difference in difference is what we're looking at. And then we estimate an impact just to make sure that our samples are fully balanced, because even in a randomization study, it's not always exactly perfect. So we throw in a regression and we come up with this estimate for the treatment on the treated effect. So this is of the people, the effect of the people who had their rent reported. So this is our best estimate of the group which we really expected to see the boost for. We obviously can have in the paper the intent to treat estimate as well. So this this estimated impact for those with rent reporting is we're talking about a 12 percentage point bump in terms of more people in our treatment group having a credit score than they did, or rather than they would have in the control. In other words, the impact, the but-for test on rent reporting is that 12 percentage point boost there. Now, interestingly, we do not see, or rather, we're not able to say that a 10-point increase in credit score is significant. But we do see some differential effects along the distribution. So in specific, we see this 25% point boost in the share of people who have a credit score of at least 600. However, we don't detect an effect on the share of people who have a score of at least 660. So what these findings are telling us is that rent reporting is helping people get a score more than they would have, and it's helping them establish at least a subprime score. It's not necessarily helping people establish a prime score. Okay. So here's a visual to look at that. This is our control group. We have our before period and our after period. Here's the share of people that were unscored before and after, very much the same. A little bit of movement into the scoring, some in this under 600 and some in the over 600 category, but mostly the same. And for folks who are in the under 600 range, tag some prime, there's some movement into this near prime or better category, but almost an equal amount of movement back. And so some people are switching places over time. This happens. Credit scores go up and they go down for a variety of reasons, and we see that dynamism within our control group. So this is kind of what happens but for rent reporting. How does that compare with those who are getting rent reporting? Okay, so in the unscored group, so we have about half of those who are unscored that are establishing a score. A lot of those going above 600, so at least in the near prime category there. And of course, there's some movement back into the under 600 and back again there. And in the sub 600, we see some greater movement here. This bar is thicker than the blue. So we see more people moving from the under 6 to the over 6 category than reverse. So in terms of how, this bar is shaping this proportion, people that are over 6 at baseline versus over 6 before, it really is a combination of people who are under 6 that are moving up and people who were unscored. This growth is represented by both of those types of individuals, which is important to understanding how things mechanically are moving. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute, but just want to talk about what are some of the implementation realities about how this works. So first off, we had roughly this many people sign up. About 1 in 4 in the end couldn't enroll. And then we had some greater attrition. 2 in 5 already had a credit score above 600, and then another of those, 1 in 3, were not reported. So that means among all the people who are interested, right, which isn't everyone, but among those who are interested, we really see the potential there of benefits. And again, this is in a assisted housing context, so the proportions will be somewhat different in different contexts, which is important. But it is still important to note that it is really this subset of individuals who can benefit from rent reporting. And that subset is you need to stay in your apartment. If you move out, you're not getting your rent reported. There were a few deaths, right? People pass away. Some people thought they were on the lease and apparently weren't on the lease, or the social security number wasn't filtered through and checked out. So there's some dynamics like that. Obviously, we were doing this positive only reporting, so people don't actually pay the rent. They're not getting it on there. And then, of course, those who have already more than a 600 score, already pretty good scores, are not going to see the effect as well. So it really is this group who has the potential to benefit from rent reporting. And the good news is we can actually know who those are. And so we can begin to target the supports to specific individuals. Okay, that's our study. If there's more questions, we would be happy to take them into the Q&A, put them in the Q&A box as well. And of course, we've got the full paper, so read it, and happy to have your engagement there. I will now pass it to my colleague, Dan, and he is going to moderate a panel and a discussion about policy and practice.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. We are very fortunate to be joined by a great panel today. We have Rachel Levy-Culler, who is the Housing Innovations Senior Specialist at Credit Builders Alliance, where she focuses on supporting advancement of CBA's rent reporting services. We have Nikki Gomez, a lobbyist for the Washington Federation of State Employees, who advocated on behalf of the union for legislation to expand rent reporting in Washington. And we have Nick Geil, who is the legislative director for Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal in New York's 67th District, who sponsored legislation regulating rent reporting in New York. I want to thank everybody for joining us here. And if you could each take yourself, put yourself on camera. Thank you. And I'm going to start with Nick. I'd like to start with you telling us a little bit about the legislation that Assemblymember Rosenthal proposed and your work on it. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Great. So thank you for having me, and apologies that the Assembly member herself wasn't able to join. We're at the end of the session here in New York, so everything is a little bit chaotic, and she had to go down to the floor for a debate. But the Assembly member is chair of the Housing Committee here in the Assembly, and so that is how we came to this issue. And we started to learn about credit reporting programs that are happening around the country, pilots in different research programs like this one and the people that they benefit. And we started to understand that obviously a person's credit score has such an outsized impact on their ability to do so many things, whether it's getting a mortgage or being able to purchase a car, get education loans. And we understood that the rent payments, which for many people are their biggest expense each month, are not being reported. And so you're missing out on what could be a very positive impact on your credit score. And so we looked through the different programs that are available and we started to meet with different stakeholders. And we looked at a few different ways of doing this. So we initially had a bill that was going to prohibit the use of late rent payments on credit scores. And so that garnered a lot of opposition from different stakeholders and people had real issues with that. I think there was an idea that being able to report late rent payments was a way of punishing tenants almost, if there was a need to hold them responsible for not paying rent. So we started looking at the different options here. And what we ended up coming up with was a bill that amends the real property law to ensure that tenants that opt into a credit reporting program can do so. And so this is an option that landlords have available to them as they do now. But we would ensure that tenants are provided with information upfront about what credit agencies their information is reported to, making sure that they know that they have the ability to opt in or opt out at any point, and also giving them the option of having the last 24 months of payments shared when they enroll in the program. So say you've been paying your rent on time for many years, you'd be able to go back 24 months, have those old payments reported as well. The other part that we made sure to address in the bill is the cost. So I know some bills that are out there are allowing in other states landlords to collect fees for participating in these programs. And so there's a small charge on the landlords each month to do this reporting. Our bill says that the landlord cannot impose a fine greater than $5 per month or the actual cost of reporting, whichever is less. And we wanted to ensure that it didn't become something that landlords were able to take in excess money with. It wasn't going to be something that tenants were end up footing the bill for something that really was just a small fee. And then we also provided protections for tenants that are participating in rent strikes. And so oftentimes you will have buildings that have violations in them and people may exercise the right to a rent strike. We wanted to make sure that that alone was not going to be counted as late payments and reported, because our bill is for both on-time payments or late payments, whichever way the landlord chooses to work their program. And then, as I mentioned earlier, just giving them the option to opt out at any time. And so we met with Fannie Mae. I know they've been doing this positive rent reporting program since 22. It'll end later this year. And we saw for some tenants, as you described earlier, they can increase their scores by up to 40 points or so if they are not, if they don't have credit already, or say they have low credit. There's a real good benefit for those people. So that is briefly what the bill does, and we're hoping to move it forward. We're coming up at the end of the session, so the bill is still in the Housing Committee. If it does not end up moving forward over the next couple weeks before we adjourn, then we'll be back at it next session in January.
Thanks. And this legislation, I think, goes further than what we've seen elsewhere in terms of sort of setting guardrails around rent reporting. Is there a hope that that encourages or discourages expansion of rent reporting and sort of makes, are you trying to encourage it to be more widespread, discourage it, or just sort of thinking that that is going to happen one way or another and setting up these guardrails?
Yeah, I think we would like to encourage it because we've seen all of the benefits that the programs can provide, but we also wanted to make sure that tenants knew exactly what they were signing up for and that they had all the information. One of the things we heard a lot about is the distrust that some tenants might have with signing up for these programs. And so they might be cautious in signing up. We thought giving them all that information up front, giving them some protections here would help. But we would like to see it expanded. We thought about the idea of perhaps requiring landlords to do this, something like what California has done. But then it opens up a new set of issues of requiring landlords to take on this new responsibility.
I'd like to turn now to Nikki Gomez, and if you could tell us a bit about the legislation that was proposed in Washington State, and why you supported it, and why the union supported it.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. So first, I kind of want to set the stage a little bit. So in Washington, rent is prohibitively high. It's a huge factor for a lot of young people for being able to live near where you work. A lot of our members are, on the lower end of the pay scale. Most of our employees that we represent at the Washington Federation of State Employees, they're within a range of classified employees. So we're talking groundskeepers, we're talking janitors, things like that. So they're not getting the high end of the pay scale. So that's kind of where we started from. We're always looking for things to help our members' pocketbooks. So we've been looking for ways to help make rent, kind of worth the price because they're spending a ton of money. There's also no real regulations in Washington State surrounding, how high the rent can be raised at the end of, a contract if they're going into a new contract or if they're going month by month. And so the majority party at the same time was running a rent stabilization bill for the past couple of years, and that just passed this session. So that's kind of the background context of where we were coming from. We have 2025 was actually our second effort to run on-time rent credit reporting in Washington State. So both times we've run the bill through the Housing Committee, and we've continued to try to find ways to help it fit into RCW 5918, which is the Residential Landlord Tenant Act, and then also in 5920, which is the Manufactured Mobile Home Landlord Tenant Act. We think that that is the right spot for our state for this to be couched into, and we were trying to make it part of the contract itself. So when a person signs that contract with their landlord, it would be within that document. The first time we attempted the on-time rent credit reporting was back in 2014. That was House Bill 2323 and Senate Bill 6212. The House bill was with the chair of the Housing Committee, Representative Peterson, who's also a council member over in Edmonds. The Senate bill was sponsored by Sharon Shoemake, and then she's a professor over at Western Washington University who works in economics. And she's in Bellingham. So after looking together at what the other states did and digging through some information about like, what does this cost landlords? What's the best way to kind of look through it? We looked at New York, we looked at DC, we looked at Colorado, California, and we said, okay, well, maybe we just go big, right? And so we decided to just make it part of the rental contract if requested by the tenant, and then require the landlord to report it, right? And so that's kind of where that bill was. The second bill for 2025, that one was this session, and that was a freshman legislator out of Spokane. She's the vice chair of the Housing Committee and a licensed real estate broker. And so she kind of understands a little bit more like in depth about kind of the rental landscape and is able to kind of navigate through that. It was her first session, and so we're looking forward to bringing it back next year. But after receiving the Colorado report and reading through that, we decided to opt to do a pilot program. It was very similar to the Colorado, the voluntary model, and we couched it within the Department of Financial Institutions, aiming at about 100 tenants with a focus on serving underserved populations. And so that's kind of where that bill was. Both bills did not pass, and so we're hoping to figure this out.
Great, thank you. I want to sort of zoom out to a 30,000-foot view for a minute. Rachel, could you share a bit about Credit Builders Alliance's role in working with rent reporting, CBA's policy position, and sort of what you've seen as being explored across the country, the most interesting and promising policies?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much to Urban Institute for having me today. So Credit Builders Alliance, or CBA, has been a leader in the rent reporting space for over a decade. And our focus has been on providing rent reporting implementation, training, and technical assistance to affordable housing providers so that they're able to set up thoughtful, organized, and intentional rent reporting programs for their residents. To date, we've worked with over 80 housing providers across the country to support them in starting these programs. In addition to that work, we also meet with those drafting or considering rent reporting legislation to share our expertise, our experiences, and our recommendations. And this includes our policy stance, which you can read more about on our Rent Reporting Center website. But the main points are that, one, rent reporting is an evidence-based credit building strategy that can help residents with no credit or low credit establish or increase their scores, as the RCT discusses. Second, housing providers should be given the choice whether to follow an opt-in or opt-out model. We share information about both models when we provide technical assistance. Next, positive-only reporting is best practice, so reporting on-time payments only. Affordable housing should absolutely be included in the conversation as a way to expand the opportunity for all to build credit as an asset. Including credit education can enhance the effectiveness of rent reporting and its impact. And finally, the goal should be for housing providers to pay for the cost of rent reporting on behalf of their residents if they can reasonably and sustainably do so. So the first pieces of rent reporting legislation, as Nikki was talking about, came from the DC City Council, California, and Colorado. The DC City Council bill created a pilot program at the DC Housing Authority. We have a really great video about this on our Rent Reporting Center website. And I always like to share that at least 10 residents who participated in this program have become homeowners. The Colorado bill allowed for a 3-year pilot program. They also had a goal of enrolling at least 100 residents, and they ended up enrolling 440 residents. Their final report also shares that the average score increase for participants was 62 points. Another very interesting and creative pilot was the one that the Delaware State Housing Authority ran. This pilot was not the result of any legislation, but rather funded through ARPA dollars, or the American Rescue Plan Act. Towards the end of their pilot cycle, they had enrolled 180 renters, and over 60% of these experienced a score increase with an average increase of 45 points. Those are just some preliminary results, but they have a final report coming out soon, so definitely be on the lookout for that. Pennsylvania has been working to pass a rent reporting bill, and New Hampshire introduced one earlier this year. This was after the sponsor there was inspired by a comment in a speech she heard from Congressman Maxwell Frost. He was talking about not being able to build credit, and he mentioned rent reporting. And then I believe Maine, Hawaii, Georgia, New Jersey, and the New York City Council have also been working on or are considering rent reporting legislation, just to name a few that we're aware of. One thing I think that has been promising is that many individuals or groups that are working on this legislation will reach out to us for our insights. Or if we reach out to a group that we see as drafting legislation, many are willing to hear what we have to say and may even consider making edits to their drafts based on our conversations. So in addition to speaking with those drafting legislation in New Hampshire and Pennsylvania, we've also had conversations recently with City Council in Washington State, the Division of Homeless Solutions at the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Maine Treasurer's Office. So all of this to say, it's promising to see that people in a position to enact policy in different offices and different departments across the country are interested in learning more about how they can bring this to their community.
Thanks so much. I want to ask, I think for everybody on the panel, but maybe Nick, I'll start with you. Our research highlights, and we saw this with the data that Maitri showed as well, that there's a particular population that stands to benefit the most from rent reporting. So people who have no credit or credit scores below 600 and who are paying their rent on time, staying in the same unit. Was there any conversations in New York about trying to target specific groups or who stands to benefit the most? Sorry, we can't hear you. Maybe Rachel, would you mind jumping in? I say as you take a sip of water.
I'm sorry, what, could you repeat the question? Because I thought it was specific to New York, but
Sure, just in general, about policies to try to target rent reporting to the people who would benefit the most.
yeah, sure. And then, yeah, Nick, if you want to jump in, I think that policy could include funding for training and technical assistance to help ensure that landlords and property management companies really have a solid understanding of appropriate messaging around just that there is a specific group of renters that are most likely to benefit. For example, when we provide this assistance, we spend a lot of time providing detailed information about what rent reporting is, who it's most likely to benefit, why credit building is important, and what specific messaging should be shared with colleagues and residents so they understand all of this. We want housing provider staff to feel confident in educating not only the residents, but also colleagues who may not have a role in their rent reporting program or who have a role but maybe aren't participating in the trainings we provide. I also think that policy could make sure to include affordable housing providers, not because we can generalize that all residents living in affordable housing have no credit or low credit scores, but of course, because some communities don't offer access to safe and affordable credit and credit building opportunities.
In New York,
A lot of, oh, go ahead, Nick.
sure. We didn't specify, you know, this was for one particular group. We kind of left it broad so that it would apply to all private landlords that wanted to participate in the program. We are thinking, though, about ways that we can better target this to populations that may stand to benefit even more. And so we're speaking with public housing agencies and others that maybe can work this into their programs to see if that's possible or if legislation would be helpful in that context. But understanding that, of course, this is something that would benefit a certain set of people much more. But we still want it to be available for everybody else that may want to opt into.
I want to get to, we're getting a lot of questions from the audience. I want to jump to some of those. A number of folks have asked about the logistics of positive only reporting, right? There's, and just to clarify, there are instances where landlords are reporting all payments, whether they're made or missed, and other instances where the landlords have elected or been required to only report positive payments. And so just no data is sent if rental payments are missed. But there's a concern that there's a risk that positive only reporting in practice, if it becomes widespread, could still harm people who don't have that, right? And it could be seen as a signal that a lack of positive reporting means people didn't pay their rent. And so I guess for anybody on the panel, I want to ask if that has come up in conversations around legislation, in terms of pushback, or in terms of other ideas to try to mitigate against those risks.
I can hop in here. It has come up, and there's really the answer. I mean, the way that I've been looking at it is, regardless of whether you report positive only, I mean, there's already negative reporting on credit scores, and so it doesn't make any sense why you could be doing something that is considered a positive thing and not get credit for that. And so that's kind of how we've been looking at it. I know probably Rachel knows a little bit more about the specifics on, how credit agencies view it. But from my understanding and from what I've been able to find out is that credit agencies already kind of look at different factors. There's different models of credit reporting. And so there's just different ways to view a person's full credit history. And that's kind of how we've been looking at it in Washington.
Thank you. That's a great segue into another question we're getting, which is what type of credit scores are being impacted. As you all know, but for everybody else in the audience, there's a number of different credit scores. There's both FICO and Vantage, and there's different versions of each. And sort of the more recent versions factor in rent reporting, but some decisions are still made using older vintages of those scoring models. So I know on our end in the research, we used like Vantage 4, but the sort of most recent version that includes rent reporting. But we also then, as Brett mentioned, wanted to look at sort of what are these other outcomes? Could we see if people are opening up new credit cards that they might not have qualified for in the absence of rent reporting, after seeing their jump in their credit score, and now they have better credit. We found that it was sort of too soon and too vague to pick up on that, but I think that's still an important area for future research. Rachel, do you have anything that CBA talks about in terms of technical assistance around the different credit scores and how that interacts with rent reporting?
Yeah, like you said, it's factored into the newer models. So FICO 9 and 1010T, Vantage 3.0 and 4.0. It does impact those scores. It's on all of the reports. And we also talk about, in addition to credit score improvement, people also feel this sense of empowerment when they do see that, and will hopefully look to other credit building tools and policies, other credit building tools and services to build their credit that may affect like the older models. So that's something that we talk about a lot. So that's what I would add there.
We also got questions about the mechanics of rent reporting. What is the burden like for the tenant? And what are the costs for the housing provider? So, Nick, you mentioned capping it at, I think it's $5 in the proposed legislation.
Correct. Yep.
And what sort of discussions sort of led to that number?
Yeah, we spoke with Isuzu and some other groups and tried to get a sense from them of exactly how much the cost was going to be. And it varies, but it seems like most of the cost estimates that we were hearing were somewhere around $3, $4, $5 per month. I know some other bills that we looked at, it was going up to as high as $10 that they were allowing to collect. But we were comfortable with capping it at $5 or whatever the actual charge is if it is less than that.
And Nick, did that come up in Washington at all?
It did, and I think we were around the same as we started kind of trying to figure out what the actual cost was per person. We were around the $5 to $10 range was what we kept hearing, and so we capped the cost. We didn't want it to negatively impact low-income renters.
And I think that jives with what we heard in our research. One thing that we are a little still unclear on is to what extent that prices might be different for small landlords versus large landlords, and whether the per tenant cost is going to be higher if you have 4 tenants than if you have 500. And so I think I want to go from that to a question about messaging to landlords. We've spoken to folks in California who talked about the landlords associations being sort of heavily involved and advocating for or against these legislation. In Washington or New York, did the landlords talk about what they perceived as their burdens, other beyond the cost of rent reporting, but extra paperwork, or sort of what did they see as a potential holdup or a potential benefit to them?
I can go ahead. Yes, that actually did come up. So landlords were actively lobbying against this idea in both instances, both bills, and the arguments were having to do with a number of factors. There was, it's going to cost extra. There was a situation where they were talking about how it would affect their mom and pop landlords, which in Washington state was really hard to determine because we don't have a Department of Housing statewide. And so there's no data collected as to what it constitutes a mom and pop. We tried to, narrow it down to if you own a certain number of units, but it's also hard to determine property versus unit and those kinds of things because there's no data. You can have a property that has 500 units. And so that became a problem. And then the other thing that they were talking about was the technical aspects of the rent reporting itself. Like it would be very hard to accomplish. It would increase administrative burden. They would have to hire some additional people. So lots of arguments, most of which I am not fully in agreement with, because I've also talked to other larger landlords that already offer this service as part of their package for when somebody applies to live in their apartment building. So I don't know.
We're close on time, so I think I want to kind of wrap with thinking about where things are going from here. And so, Rachel, you know, you're working across the country. I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on sort of the extent to which rent reporting is continuing to grow and sort of how big it's getting and where we're going next.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, very quickly, it's an accessible way to build credit that doesn't require taking on any additional debt. We continue to lead cohorts of affordable housing providers through implementation, training, and technical assistance. So there is interest there, as well as from the institutions and corporations that fund this work. They'll provide grants and we'll provide sub-grants to the housing providers. Nonprofits are also reach out to us regularly to find out more about how to help their clients, whether or not they own and operate housing.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for joining. I think this was really insightful. I'm excited to sort of have Brett share out our research and learn from all of our speakers and panelists about rent reporting and where things are going from here. I will also sort of take a moment to plug ongoing work that Urban is doing with Credit Builders Alliance and Kaiser Permanente to study California's rent reporting policy, which requires rent reporting for large landlords. And so we're working on a better understanding that rollout and doing a deep dive into what that has meant for the state, and hope to be able to share that research with all of you next year. So with that, I will thank everybody one more time and wrap it up.